let's have a look let's discuss briefly something which for a lot of you right now is probably not halacha l'maisa. It's not practical halacha, but in mitzvah Hashem it will be, and that's using a vaporizer. Children tend to get sick. You need to put a vaporizer on, sometimes a warm one, sometimes a cold one, in order to give them, a little bit of humidity.
Humility?
No, humility is something else, which hopefully the yeshiva is going to pump into here as well. The yeshiva vaporizer will be giving you humidity. What do you do with these things? So it's also to put water. It's forbidden to put water into. They've got like a sort of like a pot, a bowl. Thank you. I was trying to remember that word bowl. It was completely beyond me. There's a bowl at the bottom, and then you've got the piece that sits on the top, which causes the water to turn into steam, whether it's warm steam or cold steam. It's a problem with putting water into that bowl, adding more water in on Shabbos, because of the concerns of Bishul, right? What's happening over there is that something in there is causing this thing to heat up and turning it into steam. Is
that true by both cold or hot?
As far as I'm aware, they're both using something in order to turn this into some kind of whether it's a spray or whether it's steam, right? One way or the other. If the person is sick, so if the kid is sick and it's vital that they have this thing, which unfortunately does happen from time to time, then it's permissible to add. It would be preferable to ask a non-Jew to add water into the reservoir at the bottom. But if that's not possible, it would be permissible to add it in bishinoi, which means using a slightly different way of doing it. So perhaps instead of using your right hand, use your left hand to fill the, to put the water into the thing. Okay, hold on a second. I am going to retract some of what I said, but that's okay, so I don't think anyone was listening anyway. Right now we're talking about hot vaporizers, not cold ones. Hot vaporizers which cause the thing to steam up, and the steam comes out of a little spout and it spreads itself around and it makes the place nice and damp. It's if the person is sick, then you should try to find a non-Jew to add. If the person is sick, seriously sick, then you try to find a non-Jew to add water into the reservoir at the bottom.
Make the non-Jew do what you do.
No, but when we're in times when the person is considered to be sick, if he doesn't have it, it's going to make him even sicker. Then it's okay. I mean, like I said before, it's okay for you to do it as well if you do it b'shinoi, right? That's called a cholesh yesh bo sakana. It's got a din of pikuach nefesh, and sofek pikuach nefesh, which means that it's permissible to do it. If the person is just uncomfortable, but they haven't reached a point where there's really any danger over here, then nobody should be adding any water, including a non-Jew. Humidifiers that cold humidifiers are okay to add water on Shabbos, right? The reason for that is because they are not heating anything up. All they're doing, I'm trying to cast my mind back. It's been a while since we've had little children at home, but we used to have a stack of humidifiers because, of course, none of them were ever working. But the cold humidifiers work simply with it spritzes out the water in a very fine spray, and it brings liquid into the atmosphere. When you add water to something like this, it's got to be detached from its electricity supply, which means that most people you don't leave a humidifier on the whole of Shabbos. So, the kid's going to go to sleep, you have it on at night, you have it on in the afternoon, maybe if the kid's going to take an afternoon nap, but no, you shouldn't be leaving these things on 24 hours a day. So when the electricity supply is cut off with the time switch, whatever kind of system you've got, at that point you can add more water into the system, into the cold humidifier, and that's okay. Okay, we got to take a look at some other things. It's going to get a little bit complicated over here. I apologize in advance. There are some dimensions over here which are not Torah prohibitions, they are rabbinical prohibitions. The rabbis came along because of the Torah prohibition of cooking on Shabbos is it's such an acute prohibition. So the rabbis came along and they added various various barriers around to make sure that we should be as far away from cooking as possible. One of them is something which is called, where's it gone? One of them is something called shahir, and the other one is something called returning food back onto a hot plate, and something called hatmona. Hatmona is when you completely cover up something in order to keep it warm on the hot plate. So let's have a look and see what we've got. We spoke about this concept of Michael ben Drusai, which is this, the food has to be cooked at least a third or a half, depending on which opinion you follow. It's normally, under normal circumstances, it is forbidden to put food that has started its cooking process on Erev Shabbos, but has not yet reached the level of Michael ben Drusai. It's forbidden to put it onto the platter and have it continue the process of cooking after Shabbos comes in. Once it's reached that level, then there's no problem whatsoever. So, for example, if you've got chicken and I don't know how long it takes for chicken to cook exactly. I mean, first you've got to catch the thing, right? But once you've caught it and got it into the oven, whatever, I don't know, let's say it takes an hour to cook a piece of chicken. Once it's cooked 20 minutes in the oven, at that point you can take it and you can transfer it onto the hot plate, or you can keep it in your oven if your oven's got a Shabbos mode, and it can carry on cooking when Shabbos comes in. If it hasn't reached that point yet, it's a problem.
Are you literally? You're saying estimating 20%, or are you saying
a third, minimum of a third? Yeah, which means like this. And I don't know if you're putting up I don't know, kugel, for example. You're cooking potato kugel. So I imagine potato kugel also probably takes about an hour or something to cook. So once you've hit that 20-minute mark, then when Shabbos comes in, it's okay to carry on to have it continue cooking, even though it's not completely finished, in the hope that when you come home from shul, it's going to finish up its process, it's going to be ready to eat. Okay? So you have to approximate a third. Again, you got to be reasonably aware of how long it takes for things to cook. There is a prohibition of something called shahir. What is shahir? Shahir is making something hotter than it was. Again, in the olden days, these things are not so applicable to us today. In the standard conventional understanding, in the olden days, people would put things onto coals to try to keep them warm throughout Shabbos. The problem with coals is that when you move them, you can make things warmer. You can put things out. Depends how careful you are. So the food that's sitting on top of an open fire, food that's sitting on top of on top of coals or within the coals, which is what sometimes they used to do, is you've got to be very, very careful not to touch it whilst it's going through the cooking process. Today, we don't really have these problems anymore. Most people don't cook like that. We've got people use their ovens or they use their stovetops. So the thing to do when you've got a stovetop running on gas is to put a piece of copper over the top of it. It's called a blech. That you can have the fire on. It can be left on a reasonably low light, and you put a piece of copper on the top, and the thing now becomes like a hot plate, like an electric hot plate, but it's being run through gas. And that means that you've now covered the fire source, which is going to make it less problematic. Another thing you need to know, certain things have got, certain ways of warming things up have got buttons to control what's going on, right? So if some warming trays, for example, have got dials that you can turn in order to decide how warm you want it to be, which ones you want to be on, which ones you don't want to be on. Just in general, the poskim, the halachic authorities say that a person should be careful on Erev Shabbos to cover the knobs to make sure that they can't be moved. Yeah.
I heard somewhere, someone was saying that in Israel, no one even makes those. Do you know if that's true or not? Like Israeli companies who make hot plates?
Yeah, not that I know of, which means that you're right, that the Israeli-made hot plates are normally very, very simple affairs. They are just, elements that are running underneath either a tin, like some kind of metal or some kind of ceramic top, and you can't, there's not very much you can do with them. You plug them in and they heat up. Take the plug out, they cool down. That's about as far as you can go with them. Some of them are pretty fierce, actually.
What was that? The knobs?
Huh?
What were you saying about?
You can't touch the knobs on Shabbos. Which is, if you've got knobs on your hot plate, my mother used to have a heating trolley. Being very, sophisticated people that we were. My mother had a heating trolley which had 3 different sections to it. There was a big space down at the bottom where you could leave the soup and the cholent and all kinds of things were left in there. Then there was one a little bit higher up, which was used. I mean, I think originally when it wasn't made for Jewish people. It was made for aristocratic Englishmen. So that the tray that was there was actually made, I think, to put plates in it, to warm the plates up. They should, that your food chas v'shalom, your hot food shouldn't touch cold plates because that might be
disastrous.
Exactly. In my family, we don't really wait long enough to see whether the plate's hot or cold before we finish what's on it anyway. So it's all really just academic, actually. And on the top was a sort of like a more standard hot plate with a section on the side that was much hotter than the other bits. Over there, so it had a whole bunch of dials over there. You could control the temperature on each one. And if that was okay, that stuff on Shabbos, it had to be covered up. The dials had to be covered up to make sure nobody was going to move them in any way. If the dials weren't covered up, it's still possible to use it to heat up food, but you need to be very careful, and it's only something that you should do. If you shouldn't do this, what's called lechatchila, but you should do it b'di'eved. You forgot to do it, you ran out of time, whatever it is. So it's okay. You can use the hot plate, but Mitz Hashem, next Shabbos you'll be a little bit more careful about it. Yeah.
You were saying right before the cart story that there are some Israeli-made hot plates that can be pretty fierce in terms of temperature.
Yeah.
What is the responsibility of the buyer of one of those? I mean, there's got to be, even though you can't adjust it, it's subject to a maximum temperature, right? I mean, do people just assume that this manufacturer knows what they're doing?
Well, most hot plates that I've seen, in fact, all hot plates that I've seen recently on the market, all come with some kind of a kosher, some kind of a kosher symbol, which means that it's been through some kind of somebody's checked the factory, and they've said that this stuff is okay to use on Shabbos. What happens is with all of these things, again, that they're pretty, like I mentioned before, they're pretty primitive, which means that they will reach their maximal heat and stay on that. Right? They don't change their temperature. They've got no thermostats. They just get to, it's just filaments. That's all it is, and it will heat itself up until it's red hot. You can't see it's red hot because it's got the cover on top of it. But if you put food directly down on top of it, even before, I'm talking about before Shabbos, in a way that's perfectly permissible, if you put food directly down on top of it, very often the bottom gets burnt.
Yeah.
I think if you were to sit on it, the same would happen, actually.
But you're saying that there's, you can just say, and there's the hechsher that meets my criteria, and that's it. You don't have to.
I don't think you have to worry about anything else. You can just, plug. What's it called? Plug and go, right? You can just plug it in, and you can let it warm up, and you can put your food on top of it. I find we've got one hot plate that we brought with us from England. We got it as a wedding present many years ago. It's still working. Not to say anything, but it's still working. Yeah. And then we've got one of these sort of like standard Israeli things, and I found that putting food down on the standard Israeli ones, if it's not like a pot of soup, which I guess the hotter it gets, the better it is. I normally put silver foil underneath whatever I'm putting on it before Shabbos, because otherwise it gets like I said, it gets very hot, and it can burn the food. This is not for halachic reasons. This is purely for culinary reasons. Okay, now depending on how stringent you want to be over here with regards to a hot plate, most authorities are of the opinion these standard Israeli hot plates that are just plates, great sheets of metal that have filaments underneath. According to most poskim, according to most authorities, there's no problem whatsoever using them, and you can put your food before Shabbos directly on top of that. Rabbi Yashiv was a little bit more stringent, and he suggested that perhaps you needed to put some sheets of silver foil on top of the hot plate in order to have some kind of a thing, because he said that the heat was so fierce that maybe it had a din of being like fire, and if it's like fire, it needs to be covered. The same way that if you've got fire coming out of your gas top, you need to put some kind of a blech, some kind of a copper covering on the top in order to be able to use it. So too, Rabbi Yashiv felt that it would be better to put silver foil, some layers of silver foil on top of the hot plate, just to make sure that you're not, there's no concern whatsoever. Again, do you have to do it? I'm not telling you have to do it. I think at this point, whatever you do, it's going to be okay, or whatever you do, it's not going to be okay. I think we've covered all our bases, no?
Yeah.
Sounds okay, right?
Yeah.
Do you heard the Rabbi held that those plates aren't considered bishul at all?
Yeah.
Even Shabbos they could put it straight on?
Yeah, the Sfadim, in general, the Sfadim are much, much more makel when it comes to warming up food on Shabbos than the Ashkenazim are. It's a machlokes between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. The Ashkenazim follow the rulings of the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles. The Sfadim follow the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Cairo, and that's why by the Sfadim it's a lot less complicated. Food that is permitted to be warmed up on Shabbos can be put directly onto the hot plate, as opposed to, like we spoke about in the past, by the Ashkenazim, you have to put some kind of something that's going to raise it up off the hot plate itself in order to be able to warm it up. Interesting enough, it's permissible to take food that you want to warm up and put it on something other than a hot plate, and that's a lot less complicated. So, for example, things that were not made in order to heat up food, like radiators. Right, you've got your radiator running, and it's nice and warm, and you want to warm a little piece of food up over there. So, over there, the gzera, the decree that the rabbis decreed, as a rule, the rabbis don't decree. So they don't decree on a decree, which means a decree is decreed on a Torah prohibition in order to make things, a little safer, that nobody should transgress. However, the rabbis do not, as a rule, make a further decree on top of an already existing decree. That's already too stringent, which means that if you've got something that you want to warm up, you want to warm something up and you want to put it on your radiator at home, that's a lot less complicated than putting it onto the hot plate.
So you just place it on, no problem.
Yeah.
Like your challah or something like. It's not going to heat up the soup, really.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know what kind of heat you've got your radiator or something.
That isn't a radiator muksa?
I'm talking about radiator that's attached to the wall that's running through a central heating system. I wouldn't suggest that you put anything in top of an electric heater, just for safety reasons. You may end up with something a little bit warmer than challah. It may turn into toast, which is not really what you want. I mean, maybe you like toasted challah, but that's not the way to do it. After Shabbos, put it in the oven or put it in the toaster and do it that way. It's a lot safer. It really is.
Rabbi, what about some people that I know have it covered for their TV, their telephones on Shabbat?
Yeah, I think it's very cute. There's no obligation to cover up muktzah things, right? There's no obligation to do it. The only thing is like this: that first of all, muktzah items are not Shabbosdik. So if you've got a telephone sitting on the table over there, so personally I think it's quite nice to cover it up. I have a cover that we use covers, in the kitchen and in the room that I learn in. I think it's nice. There's no obligation to do it. Covering a TV for Shabbos, well, the real question is whether you're allowed to have a TV to begin with, right?
I'm surprised.
No?
Yeah, but it's a computer with a whole,
it's not a TV, it's a computer.
No, it is a TV. It is a TV.
Oh, no, it's a computer screen.
You can't have a normal TV, you have to have at least a 60-inch one. That's probably what you mean, right?
No, they don't have a 60 inch.
How much is 60 inches? Is that?
Quite big.
It's big.
It's a big
That's
TV.
big.
It's a big TV.
It's like this table.
Oh my gosh,
Probably
I
not as
think
big as this
No,
TV.
it's-
I think here,
Yeah.
I think if TVs were okay to have, then as Jews, you know, if there was a mitzvah to have a TV, then obviously the bigger it is, the better the better the mitzvah would be, right? Which means that, you know, 60 inches would probably be according to Rav Chaim Noi, but maybe according to Chazon Ish it should even be 72 inches, or, you know, but Baruch Hashem, TVs are not really, you know, a standard part of the Jewish home, so we don't have to worry about these things.
Rabbi, what if you have,
Yeah, breakfast,
you know,
well enough.
sometimes to take away the crumbs, you know, the table.
Yeah.
I'm just hypothetically, I'm using this. They have ones with batteries.
Yeah.
Okay. What if you do not take away the battery and just use it manually?
Wait, you took out the battery? You got to take out the battery. If you take out the battery,
It doesn't work, you know.
if you took out the battery, then you can use it.
Isn't that muksa?
If you left the battery in, then you can't use it, even
No,
if you're not
no.
planning on switching it on.
But without the battery.
Without the
still
battery,
consider it muksa?
No. We have at home something that I actually shoplifted from my parents' house, which is a crumb scraper. Which it's really cute actually. It's, believe it or not, it's got an ivory handle, which of course is completely politically non-correct today, but it's very old, and it's got like a sort of like a bless you, like a little sort of collection point with a piece that goes down, and you just slide it along, and the crumbs get picked up in it, and it's fantastic. It really is, and
So that's like your malacha.
that was my job. No, you should know. I have very, very warm memories. When I was a kid, that was my job on the Shabbos table. Everybody else had to clean off the plates and take everything to the kitchen and take, you know. But being the youngest child, I obviously was given the most important and the most difficult job of all, which was to scrape the crumbs off the table, which I must admit I didn't do very often.
Maybe
Being-
that's why you have it today.
It could be maybe my mother just felt that, you know.
So in England they didn't hold a plastic tablecloth, right?
Well, there could be some people did. My mother definitely did not. But
She wanted to.
being the youngest child, I felt that this was much too much work for me to be doing. And so I used to go to the bathroom and lock myself in there for about 20 minutes until you know, one of my brothers would come and knock on the door and tell me it's done. You know, you can come out now, which was, you know, it's fine. I mean, I admitted I was like 25 years old at the time, but whatever, you know. I feel that one has to shirk one's responsibilities as much as possible. That's my why do today what you can put off till tomorrow. Oh, we got plenty of books, yeah.
Procrastinators unite. Tomorrow.
Strive for the minimum.
Oh, man.
Good. After that impassioned plea for less responsibility, let's talk about taking things off of the hot plate and putting them back onto the hot plate. So we spoke about this the other day. I think, if my memory serves me correct, but you've got to be very careful, especially if you're talking about things that are liquid. You've got to be very careful when you take the pot off of the hot plate. First of all, it has to be in your mind that you're going to put it back afterwards, and you should not let go of the pot, which means that you should be holding on to it even when you've put it down somewhere. You should be holding on to it in order to be able to put it back up again. If you don't, it's a problem to put it back onto the hot plate again.
I mean, directly onto.
Directly, yeah. Again, if it's a liquid, then for Ashkenazim, it's a problem to put it back altogether.
What if it was off the blech on, like on the table, and there was a clear rishon in it? Could you, like, theoretically take your hand off while your hand was on the clear rishon in the pot? I'm just curious.
I tell you what, I don't think so. I'll tell you why. Because the pot itself is a kli rishon. The ladle becomes a kli rishon by default, which means it wasn't originally designated as a kli rishon. It became a kli rishon because it was left inside of the soup long enough, right, that it became hot. And I think that means that you need to be holding onto the pot and not onto the ladle. That's what I think. Okay, so let's go through. There are a few conditions over here to be able to take food off and put it back on. The first one is that the food has to be completely cooked by the time you're taking it off of the hot plate. Secondly, the food is going back onto the hot plate whilst it's still warm, which means if you've taken it off and now it's cooled down considerably, then at that point it's a problem to put it back onto the hot plate. The heat source, of course, has to be covered, which is something that's not a real big novel idea, because what we've learned over the last few days is that the heat source has to be covered anyway. And as I mentioned before, you've got to have the intention of returning the thing back onto the hot plate, and it wasn't put down entirely. Again, that means like you're holding onto it in order to be able to put it back. The first three of these things, which means that the food's got to be completely cooked, it's got to be warm, and it's got to the fire has to be completely covered, are absolute conditions, which means that if any one of them was not met, it's impossible to put the food back. It's completely forbidden. Even b'di'eved, it's completely forbidden to do so. The other two, right, which is the idea of that you have to have the intention to put it back onto the heat source when you're taking it off, and you should be holding on to it the whole time that you've got it. If, for whatever the reason, that wasn't quite the case, then there's room to be a little bit more flexible, and we move into the realm with something called lechatchila and b'di'eved. Lechatchila is doing something in the best possible way, according to the way the halacha says, and that's doing it. That's the way that we should do all of our mitzvahs. B'di'eved is doing something in not the best possible way, but in a way that still allows it to be done. So, for example, you might go to the rabbi and say, "Here, can I take my food off of the blech without intending to put it back on?" And he'll say, "No, you can't. You have to have an intention to do so." If you go to the rabbi and say, "Look, I took the food off of the hot plate and I forgot that I wanted to put it back on again, is it okay to return it now?" Then the rabbi will say, "Yes, it is." That's the difference between lechatchila and b'di'eved, which means you can't set out. I guess it's post facto, I guess. Right? De facto and post facto. I imagine that's a good way of describing it as any, although it's not always like that, because sometimes you could do something you're going to do it b'di'eved because you don't have any other alternative to be able to do it. Right?
If you like a brocha b'di'eved, it's after the fact, and it's not a lavatola, I think.
Right.
Is it the same with a physical movement? Is it like?
I guess in a certain way. Here, let's say for example, you make a bracha over something which you think that it's bori pri adoma, and it transpires that it's really a fruit, and it's bori pri eitz. So b'di'eved, you fulfilled your obligation because trees grow out of the ground as well, right? Can you say to yourself, "Oh, you know what? That's neat. So from now on, I'm just going to say bori pri adoma over everything that looks like it's natural produce"? No, you can't do that. That's for sure not. And if a person does that, and then a person says, "That's it. From now on, I'm going to make a bori pri adoma over apples at all times," then when he comes to make a bori pri adoma over his apple, the next time, it's going to be a bracha levatola, right? Because he's not allowed to do that.
So how does that differ from not following?
No, I think it's pretty much the same.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
the concept of b'di'eved and the chatchila. All I'm trying to say is that there is a possibility to fulfill things b'di'eved when you know already from the beginning that that's what you're going to do. Right? It is possible. There are scenarios where that's going to work. What do you do if you've got your food on a hot plate, and for whatever the reason the heat goes out? Right, so whether we're talking about a blech which has got gas underneath, I don't know, the gas runs out, or maybe you have a fuse pops in your house, and the plug that the hot plate is plugged into has now not working. So if the food is still warm, you can transfer the food to somebody else's hot plate. Or I don't know, for example, if you've got several hot plates, you've got a lot of people coming around and you need more than one hot plate, and one of them goes out, one of them burns out, you can transfer the food. If the food is still warm, you can transfer it onto the hot plate that's still working. That's okay, right? If the food is now cold, then it's a problem, which means if it's liquid, it can't be warmed up at all. If it's not liquid, it can be warmed up in the way that you would warm up solid foods by not placing it directly on top of the hot plate and putting it on top of something that's sitting on top of the hot plate. Again, what do you do? This is something which can happen. What do you do if you take the soup pot off of the hot plate in order to serve the soup to your guests on Friday night, and you take off the top and you realize that you've taken off the cholent by mistake, and the soup is still sitting on the hot plate, and the cholent is now sitting over here on the kitchen surface, right, waiting to be served up as soup. So what do you do? So first of all, I had a cousin who told me once that they made that mistake, and he was quite happy. It was, Yeshiva Bochum are very happy to eat cholent on Friday night. They're not the least bit bothered. I mean, they're happy to eat cholent on any night, actually, as far as I'm aware. And I don't think they're too bothered about how cooked it is, how cooked it's not. It's like, it's food. So he decided they were going to keep the soup on the hot plate, and they had it the next morning, and he said it was absolutely delicious because it had like concentrated itself, and he said it was absolutely fantastic. So that's one option. However, if according to many poskim, if you've made the mistake and you suddenly realize that the mistake has been made, so long as what you've taken off is still hot, you can put it back onto the hot plate and take off what it was that you were planning to take off, even though it doesn't fulfill the various criteria that we mentioned over here. You certainly didn't have any intention whatsoever to return it back onto the hot plate because you were planning on using it and it was a mistake. Other authorities say that you've got to be more stringent, and they say that you shouldn't return it back onto the hot plate. So I think at that point, if this is what has happened to you, you should utilize the COR rule, which is a competent Orthodox rabbi. Send somebody rushing off to the rabbi's house to find out what you should do. If you get real lucky, you'll get invited round to the rabbis to eat, because he'll say, oh my gosh, that's terrible here, come and eat by us, and then you can stay there and eat over there, and all your guests that are waiting for you to come back, well, they'll just have to make do. Good. I think that we're going to stop over here, because the next bit is moving on to something a little bit different. I mean, the same, but different.